In the shadowed fringes of an ancient forest, locals speak in hushed tones of a subtle madness, a whisper that seeps into the mind, blurring the line between myth and memory. Mara Allison, a seasoned documentarian who thrives on unraveling urban legends with cold facts and unyielding reason, has come to this fog-shrouded coastal town to expose the truth behind the tales. Yet as her car winds through the mist-veiled roads, she feels an unexpected chill. The air alive with unspoken promises, and the town's fog clung like a half-remembered dream. The coastal town's fog clung like a half-remembered dream, muting the clapboard houses that lined the single main street. Mara Allison pulled her rental car to a stop outside the library, the engine's rumble dying into silence that felt too absolute. She stepped out, her boots crunching on gravel salted with sea mist, and inhaled the briny chill. The air carried something else, a faint susurrus, like breath through distant leaves. Behind the rooftops, the forest loomed, its edge a ragged line of pines that seemed to lean inward, as if listening. Residents moved like shadows. An old man at the market glanced her way, his eyes polite but veiled, before turning back to his nets. A woman unloading crates from a truck offered a nod that barely creased her face, her gaze flicking to the tree line as if Mara were an unwelcome echo. The distance was tangible, a cool barrier woven from years of shared secrets. Mara adjusted her recorder's strap over her shoulder, her mind cataloging it all. Urban myth fodder, she thought. Nothing more. Facts would anchor her documentary, interviews, ambient tapes, a narrative to pierce the legend of the Whispering Woods. Inside the library, the air was thicker, scented with aged paper and faint, damp earth. Elias Finch stood behind the counter, his frame slight under a wool sweater, silver hair catching the dim light from a single window. He looked up from a ledger, his eyes sharp yet oddly distant, like a man who had stared too long at horizons. "Miss Ellison?" The documentarian from the city. His voice was soft, laced with a rhythm that evoked old ballads. He extended a hand, cool and dry. "Mara," she corrected, shaking it. "I've come for the stories, the ones about the forest." Elias's smile was fleeting, a crack in the town's frost. He led her to a back room, stacked with yellowed files and leather-bound volumes, the space humming with quiet invitation. As they settled at a scarred oak table, Mara hit record, the red light blinking like a steady heartbeat. "Tell me about the whispers," she prompted, her tone professional, probing. Rationalism was her compass. Audio would capture the myth's cadence, turn folklore into footage. Elias leaned forward, fingers tracing the spine of a book. "It's not just sound," he began, his words measured, poetic. "The forest. It breathes back what you carry inside. Folks here learn to walk wide of it, lest their own thoughts tangle in the branches." He paused, glancing toward the window, where wind chimes dangled from the eaves, simple glass tubes, glinting faintly. A breeze stirred them, tinkling a melody that blurred into the pine's distant murmur, soft as a half-formed question. Mara's pen scratched notes, but her mind snagged on that chime, melodic, yet edged with unease, echoing the forest's breath she'd noticed on arrival. Was it wind, or something mimicking her pulse? She shook it off. Superstition, mere acoustics. Yet, as Elias recounted a tale of a logger who heard his regrets woven into the leaves, the whispers outside seemed to swell, brushing her ears with indistinct phrases. Her own. No, impossible. She pressed on, recorder whirring, but doubt flickered. Could tapes hold a woods that replied in kind, offering echoes beyond mere noise? Elias watched her, his gaze warming the chill. "You're not the first outsider," he said gently, "but you might be the one to listen closest." Trust budded there, fragile as the chime's song, pulling her from isolation toward something perilously curious. The forest waited, its legend no longer distant myth, but a mirror edging toward her thoughts. Later, delving deeper into the archives, the library's door creaked like a hesitant confession, admitting Mara and Elias into a hush thickened by dust-moted air. Shelves loomed like ancient sentinels, spines of forgotten volumes whispering against the grain of warped wood. Elias moved with the quiet grace of a man who knew every shadow here, his footsteps muffled on the threadbare rug. Mara followed, her recorder slung over one shoulder, its weight a talisman of objectivity. Cold curiosity prickled her skin. Another lead in this fog-shrouded town, another thread to unravel. Legends twist like vines in the underbrush. Elias said, his voice low, threading through the stacks as he led her to a back alcove. He unlocked a glass cabinet, revealing yellowed ledgers and spools of crackling tape. Not linear tales, Mara, spirals. They start with a logger hearing his name in the wind, end with him vanishing into the canopy, convinced the trees were kin. She leaned in, eyes scanning faded ink. Accounts from the 1920s, scrawled in trembling script. A rationalist at heart, Mara noted the patterns. Isolation, auditory tricks, psychological strain. Fog and echoes, nothing more. But Elias's words lingered, coiling around her thoughts. He unspooled a tape, the player humming to life with a hiss of static. Faint voices emerged, fragmented. It listens, weaves your doubts into song. Her mind raced, cataloging. Pareidolia, suggestibility. Yet, as Elias spoke, his eyes distant, she felt the room contract. "The forest doesn't just echo," he murmured, pausing the tape. "It hears the fabric of your thoughts, the loose threads of fear you don't admit, blind spots in your own hearing, where silence amplifies what hides inside." Mara straightened, a flicker of unease stirring beneath her composure. The library's single window rattled softly, and there, suspended from a beam, overlooked in the dim light, hung a cluster of wind chimes, delicate shells, and bone tinkling in an unfelt draft. Their melody was faint, almost imagined, like murmurs sifting through leaves. Elias followed her gaze. Brought back from the edge years ago, they say the woods string their own to catch the wind's secrets. She forced a nod, but the chime's chime burrowed deeper, mirroring the spiral in her chest. Rational certainty cracked, just a hairline fracture. The forest wasn't out there anymore. It pressed in, listening. Could you even describe a place that turned your whispers against you, amplifying the doubts you dared not voice? Elias watched her, his expression a bridge between archive and abyss. Guide now, not just informant. Trust bloomed unbidden, fragile as the chime's song. But the anxiety mounted, cold curiosity thawing into something sharper, insistent. The tapes waited, and beyond the window, the forest exhaled. Following Elias's leads, Mara sought out Agnes Mercer next. The salt-tanged air of the coastal town clung to Mara's jacket as she stepped into Agnes Mercer's weathered cottage, the door creaking like a reluctant confession. Agnes, her hands veined and trembling like autumn leaves, extended a small, leather-bound journal across the scarred oak table. "It's not much," the retired ranger murmured, her voice a fragile thread against the muffled roar of the sea outside. "But it remembers what I can't forget." Mara took the journal, its cover soft with age, pages yellowed and edged with faint creases from countless anxious grips. She nodded, professional detachment her armor, and settled into a chair by the window where fog veiled the encroaching forest. Agnes retreated to the kitchen, leaving a silence that pressed like damp wool. Mara opened the book, her fingers tracing the spidery script, handwriting that quivered on the page, as if the words themselves had been born in fear. The entry was dated decades ago, the ink faded but insistent. October 12th, patrol route east near the old chime grove. Wind low, but the trees hummed. I stopped at the birch with the split trunk, the one that leans like it's listening. Then it came, a whisper, clear as my own breath. Agnes, it said. Not wind, not echo. My name, pulled from the bark. I reached out, touched the rough skin, and felt it pulse. When I pulled away, my palm burned, red lines like veins etching the flesh. Not a scratch, a mark. It stayed for weeks, fading like a secret I couldn't tell. Mara's breath caught, a rationalist reflex kicking in. Acoustic anomaly, perhaps infrasound from the woods, bending light and sound into illusions. She could record it, analyze waveforms, pin it to science like a specimen. But the words seeped deeper. Agnes's tremor bleeding into her own pulse. What if this wasn't delusion, but an echo of something buried? Her own unspoken dreads, the childhood shadows she'd dismissed as mere stories. The journal lay open in her lap, a weight that anchored her skepticism, making it waver. She glanced up. Agnes hovered in the doorway, eyes distant, as if handing over the book had unburdened one fear only to stir another. Thank you, Mara said softly, closing the cover with care. Trust flickered between them, fragile as the mark described. But as she slipped the journal into her bag, resolve hardened. She'd delve into her recordings tomorrow, cross-reference with this. Yet doubt lingered, a touching ache. Could she weave this personal legend into something objective, or would it unravel her narrative, blurring the line where story met the unseen dark? The forest outside seemed to lean closer, waiting. With the journal in hand, Mara turned to set up. The fog clung to the coastal town's edge, like a half-forgotten dream, muting the distant crash of waves against jagged rocks. Mara knelt at the forest's threshold, her fingers steady as she unpacked the analog field recorder from its weathered case. Its brass dials gleamed dully in the gray light, a relic of precision in a world that felt increasingly unmoored. Theo crouched beside her, uncoiling cables with the practiced efficiency of someone who trusted tools more than tales. Remember, Mara said, her voice a deliberate anchor of calm. We're here for the facts, the wind, the rustle, whatever the locals whisper about, not the stories. She adjusted the microphone, positioning it toward the dense wall of pines that loomed just beyond the clearing. The trees stood sentinel, their needles whispering faintly in the breeze. But as the setup progressed, an unnatural hush descended. No birdsong pierced the air, no leaves stirred beyond a subdued sigh. Theo glanced up, wiping sweat from his brow despite the chill. Facts and feelings blur out here, Mara. You know that. Agnes's journal, it's not just words. It's the tremble in her hand when she wrote them. He connected the final wire, the recorder humming to life with a soft, mechanical purr. They were partners in this, or had been once, before her obsessions pulled her inward, leaving him to guard the edges. She nodded, forcing a smile, but her eyes fixed on the tree line. The silence deepened, not empty, but pregnant, as if the forest held its breath, waiting for her to speak first. A subtle pressure built in her chest, like fingers brushing the back of her mind. It's quiet, she murmured, more to herself than him. Too quiet, the kind that amplifies the pulse in your ears, turns your own thoughts into echoes. Theo straightened, watching her. Her hands, usually so composed during interviews, hovered over the recorder without pressing record. "Mara, you good?" His tone shifted, concern threading through the pragmatism. He stepped closer, his boot crunching on fallen needles, the only sound now. She blinked, the hush coiling tighter around her ribs. "It's nothing, just the absence." But it wasn't nothing. The silence spoke, or seemed to, murmuring fragments of doubt she'd buried deep. What if it's not the wind? What if it's you? Her skepticism, her shield, frayed at the edges. She admitted it then, voice barely above a breath. "This place, it's getting under my skin. I thought I could distance it, record it like data. But what if the quiet is the story?" Theo's face tightened, his protective instinct flaring. "Then tell me straight. No filtering through your lens. If it's messing with you, we stop." He placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her, but his eyes darted to the recorder, now capturing only the void. Their breaths, the forest's withheld secrets. She finally hit record, the reels spinning lazily. The tape would hold silence, or so she hoped, but as the hush pressed in, she wondered, could it trap truth when the quiet began to whisper back? Emboldened, yet uneasy, Mara ventured alone the next day. Mara stepped into the forest's embrace, the tape recorder slung over her shoulder like a talisman against the unknown. The air hung thick with mist, cool and insistent against her skin, carrying the faint brine of the distant coast. She had come alone today, leaving Theo's cautious texts unanswered back at the inn. His warnings felt like chains, and she needed this unfiltered immersion. Determination steadied her stride. Facts would anchor her. The recorder would capture whatever truths the whispers held. She pressed record, the soft whir a mechanical heartbeat amid the trees. The path narrowed, ferns brushing her calves like tentative fingers. Wind sifted through the canopy, stirring the branches into a low susurrus, a murmur that wasn't quite wind, wasn't quite words. She paused, tilting her head, the recorder held aloft like an ear extended. "Day 3, solo entry," she murmured into the mic, her voice calm, professional. "Ambient sounds, rustling leaves, intermittent gusts, no anomalies yet." But as she walked deeper, the whispers sharpened, threading through the branches like veins of sound. They coiled around her, not random, but rhythmic, echoing the rhythm of her own breath. At first, it was innocuous, the creak of limbs mimicking distant footsteps, the sigh of leaves like a sigh she might exhale in quiet doubt. Mara quickened her pace, boots sinking into mossy earth, the forest floor yielding softly, almost welcoming, yet the sensations mounted, a prickle at her nape, the weight of unseen eyes. The branches overhead swayed, their whispers fracturing into fragments. Lost? Control? Her pulse stuttered. No, she chided herself, just pareidolia, the brain's trick on isolation. But then, clearer, twining with the wind. What if it's real, Mara? What if you're already gone? She froze, heart hammering. The voice wasn't hers, yet it was. An echo of the fear she'd buried since childhood, the one that whispered of unraveling minds in empty rooms. The branches rustled louder, their tips bending as if leaning in, carrying her name on the breeze. Mara, fragile, breaking. She clutched the recorder tighter, its buttons slick under her thumb. Rewind, play back. There it was, faint but unmistakable, layered over the wind's howl, her own unspoken dread, amplified, thrown back at her, rationality frayed at the edges. How could the forest know? Or was it her, projecting, the line between observer and observed, blurring into dread? Deeper she pressed, unease blooming in her chest, like fog rolling in, but she couldn't turn back. Not yet. The whispers pursued, branches whispering secrets she hadn't voiced, mirroring the shadows she carried. Could she trust the tape, or was it just her mind, recording its own unraveling? Back at camp that evening, the revelations deepened. The analog field recorder hummed on the weathered picnic table, its spools turning lazily under the dim lantern light. Mara leaned close, ear pressed to the headset. The forest's edge, just beyond their makeshift camp, a wall of fog-shrouded pines that seemed to lean in, listening. Theo sat across from her, fiddling with a coil of cable, his face etched with the kind of worry that had been building since they'd arrived in this hushed coastal town. She hit play, and the tape whirred to life. At first, it was just the wind through the branches, a soft susurrus she'd captured on her first solo hike. But then, layered beneath it, came the voices, faint, childlike murmurs. Not the town's legends, not Elias's poetic warnings, or Agnes's trembling tales. These were hers, a girl's hesitant laughter, echoing from a summer long buried. Mara, don't go in. It's whispering your name. Her own voice, 8 years old, laced with that old knot of anxiety, the fear of shadows in her parents' attic, the dread of being left alone. The recording warped as the wind chimes in the trees tinkled faintly in the background, their metallic sighs blending with the child's plea. It wasn't just overlap. The forest seemed to breathe into it, amplifying the words until they twisted. Mara, don't go. It's you. Her breath caught, a chill threading down her spine. Was this bleed from the equipment? Or had the woods pulled her memories loose, weaving them into its endless murmur? The line blurred, the tape a fragile membrane between then and now, real rustle and projected ache. Theo's hand shot out, pausing the playback. Mara, stop. That's not the wind. That's Jesus. Is that you? As a kid? His voice was steady, but his eyes searched hers, protective edges sharpening. You've been out there alone too long. This isn't evidence, it's messing with you. Be honest. How much of this is the forest? And how much is whatever you're carrying? She pulled back, fingers tracing the recorder's worn casing, its dials cool against her skin. Rationality flickered, a trembling flame. Facts on tape should anchor her, not unravel, but the echo lingered in her chest, that childhood tremor swelling into something sharper, a present panic clawing at the edges of her calm. The forest wasn't just amplifying stories, it was mirroring her, turning buried fears into audible ghosts. Past and pines entwined. I have to check it, she said finally, voice low, noting the quickened pulse in her wrist, the way her gaze darted to the tree line. Deeper. One more hike to verify. Theo sighed, his concern a weight between them, but she rewound the tape, the whir a promise, or a trap. What to trust? The voices etched in plastic, or the echo reality breathing back her secrets. The confrontation escalated that night. The dim glow of the laptop screen bathed the cramped motel room in a sickly blue hue, casting long shadows that danced like hesitant whispers. Mara sat on the edge of the bed, her fingers twisting the frayed hem of her jacket, eyes fixed on the device Theo had placed between them, like an accusation. The air hung heavy with the scent of damp earth from her boots, still caked with forest loam, and the faint, acrid tang of overheated electronics. Listen, Theo said, his voice low and edged, with that familiar protectiveness, the kind that used to anchor her during late-night edits, but now felt like a tether, pulling too tight. He hit play, and the raw footage unspooled. A grainy montage of her solitary hike from that afternoon, the dense canopy filtering sunlight into fractured beams. Her own narration crackled through the speakers. The wind here, it's not just air moving, it's carrying something. A pause, her breath shallow on tape. Then, the forest responded. At first, it was subtle, a rustle syncing with her words, leaves shivering as if exhaling. But then, layered beneath the ambient hush, came the echo. Not wind, not wildlife, but her own voice, fragmented and distant, carrying something inside. Mara's pulse quickened. She leaned closer, the screen's cold light reflecting in her widening eyes. It wasn't mimicry. It was inversion. Her unspoken doubt, am I losing it? Swelled into a murmur from the underbrush, woven into the audio like a shadow, puppeteered by her mind. She felt it then, the wariness coiling in her chest, a slow tighten of ribs against the rational scaffolding she'd built her life on. Theo paused the playback, his gaze steady on her, not the screen. This isn't glitch, Mara. It's you. The recorder picked up what you didn't say, what you're not admitting. The forest isn't talking. It's throwing your thoughts back at you. Her throat constricted, the room shrinking around the laptop's unblinking eye. She wanted to dismiss it, label it pareidolia, some acoustic trick of the trees. But the footage looped in her mind. The screen, a merciless mirror, capturing not just sound, but the tremor in her hands as she gripped the device earlier that day. Wariness bloomed into something sharper, a flash of heat rising behind her eyes, indignation laced with the raw sting of exposure. You're saying I fabricated this? That my fear is the story? Theo's jaw tightened, his hand hovering near the keyboard, as if ready to replay the damning loop. I'm saying stop hiding from it. We've both heard the legends, but this is yours. If you keep chasing clarity, you'll edit out the truth staring back at you. The tension thrummed between them, unspoken histories crackling like static, nights they'd shared mics and secrets, now fractured by her deepening dive into the woods. He leaned in, voice dropping to a plea wrapped in frustration. We face this together, or you lose more than the footage. Mara's breath hitched, the screen's glow etching lines of doubt across her face. The echo lingered in her ears, her own fears amplified, demanding she acknowledge them. But trust the frame, when it reflected not the forest's secrets, but the fragile borders of her own psyche. The question hung, unanswered, as the wind outside the window began its soft, insistent sigh. Seeking further clarity, Mara returned to Agnes for a deeper confession. The dim light of Agnes's cottage filtered through salt-streaked windows, casting long shadows across the scarred wooden table. Mara sat opposite, her field recorder paused mid-breath, its red light a fading ember. Theo lingered by the door, arms crossed, his pragmatic gaze a silent anchor. Agnes's hands trembled as she clutched the worn journal. Its leather cover cracked like old bark, pages yellowed with the weight of unspoken years. I shouldn't even be telling you this, Agnes whispered, her voice a fragile thread unraveling in the heavy air. Last time I went in, it was autumn, leaves like whispers underfoot. I'd patrolled those woods for decades, knew every root and ridge. But that day, the trees, they leaned in, not with wind, mind you, with voices. My name, first, just a murmur, like someone calling from the ridge. Then deeper, pulling at things I'd buried. My boy's laugh, gone these 20 years. It echoed from the canopy, clear as if he were hiding behind the next trunk. Mara leaned forward, her notebook half forgotten, the skeptic in her warring with the pull of raw vulnerability. This was gold for the story. Raw, unfiltered fear that could hook listeners from the first crackle of static. But Agnes's eyes, wide and pleading, held no performance, only the quiet terror of reliving it. Mara's pulse quickened, a knot of anxiety twisting in her chest. What if this was the thread that unraveled everything? The forest legend, yes, but twisted into spectacle, feeding the very madness she aimed to dissect. Please, Agnes continued, her fingers tightening on the journal until the veins stood out like roots. Don't make this a sensation. It's not some ghost hunt for your tape. It's memory. The woods don't devour you. They remind you of what's lost, what's fragile. If you shout it to the world, it'll twist, grow teeth it doesn't have. Leave it as it is. A quiet warning, not a scream. Theo shifted, his boot scraping the floorboards. A subtle nod of approval Mara caught in her periphery. Her throat tightened, the recorder's weight suddenly leaden in her lap. Truth demanded exposure, the unvarnished edge that made her narratives sing. Yet here, in the tremor of Agnes's voice, empathy bloomed, heavy and insistent. To sensationalize this would betray not just the woman before her, but the fragile line Mara herself walked between observer and haunted. I won't, Mara said finally, the words settling like fog. She reached across, her hand hovering before gently covering Agnes's on the journal. It'll be honest, respectful. The memory, not the monster. Anxiety ebbed, giving way to a quiet resolve. The responsibility of wielding stories, not as weapons, but as fragile bridges. Agnes exhaled, a shaky release, trust flickering back into her gaze. The silence isn't empty. It's waiting. Anxiety coiled tighter, a knot in her throat, as she stepped deeper, leaves crunching underfoot like brittle thoughts. What if this was the fraying edge? Her mind unraveling into the legend she'd come to debunk. Then, the chimes. Not the ones she'd hung as markers. Those tinkled faintly, mocking her with their contrived melody. But deeper ones, woven into the trees themselves. Wind chimes of bone and branch, or so it seemed, their notes rising unbidden. A cascade of hollow peals that blurred the line between breeze and beckon. They swayed without visible cause, clinking in rhythm with her pulse, amplifying the hush into something alive, insistent, and in that chime, a whisper formed, soft at first, like fog shaping itself into words. Mara, her name, exhaled from the canopy, not an accusation, but invitation, echoing the fear she'd buried, the dread of losing grip, of her skepticism dissolving into the very madness she chronicled. It wasn't external, not truly. It mirrored her, pulling her deepest unease into the air, making the forest a vast, resonant chamber of her psyche. Her heart raced, breaths shallow, the world tilting as if the ground whispered back her childhood shadows, the ones she'd rationalized away. She froze, recorder clutched like a talisman, its tape whirring on. The voice lingered, not demanding, but revealing. Her fear, named, no longer abstract. Panic surged. Was this the break, the story consuming her? But in the echo, a shift, the anxiety softened, threading into something like clarity. Fear wasn't the enemy. It was the thread guiding her through the blur, acknowledging the porous veil between sense and shadow. She wouldn't sensationalize this, wouldn't claim ghosts or curses. No, the truth was humbler, more fragile, a mirror held to the soul. Lowering the device, she spoke into it, voice raw but resolute. I heard my name in the wind. not as proof, but as a question. What we fear echoes back, unresolved. The chimes fell silent, leaving only her breath. The forest's hush a companion now, not a threat. Theo would respect this boundary. Elias, her quiet surrender to the mystery. As she turned back, the question hung, unanswered. Could she share this voice without turning it into spectacle? Or would words alone invite the whispers closer? In reflection, as she prepared to leave, the fog clung to the tree line like a half-forgotten dream, muting the coastal town's distant murmur as Mara crouched at the forest's edge. Her analog field recorder rested heavy in her lap, its worn dials catching the last slivers of afternoon light, a relic of her quest for unyielding truth, now feeling more like a confessor than a capturer. She hesitated, thumb hovering over the record button. The urge clawed at her to wrap this all in a neat bow, to declare the whispers mere echoes of the mind, madness tamed by microphone and reason. But the forest watched, patient and unyielding, its branches swaying in a wind that carried no sound, only the weight of what she'd heard, her own fears, refracted back in voices that weren't quite hers. She pressed record. The tape hissed to life, a soft mechanical breath amid the rustle of leaves. "Fear," she began, her voice steady, but laced with the tremor of unease, "isn't the enemy we make it out to be. It's not a thief stealing sanity from the shadows. No, it's an interpreter, a translator of the unseen folds in our psyche, whispering back what we've buried under facts and footage." Her words tumbled out, introspective and probing, as if speaking them aloud might anchor her against the pull of finality. Anxiety knotted her chest. What if this monologue was just another layer of delusion, a rationalist's desperate grasp at closure? The recorder whirred, capturing not just her voice, but the subtle undercurrent, the faint chime of wind through distant branches, mimicking the chimes she'd glimpsed deeper in, those symbols of blurred melody and mind. She paused, eyes tracing the dim path into the trees. Elias's poetic warnings echoed in her thoughts, not as gospel, but as a gentle tether. Theo's protective skepticism, a reminder of boundaries she'd nearly crossed. She wouldn't drag them into her conclusions, wouldn't force this ambiguity on their shared history. Respect demanded distance here, a quiet nod to their roles in her unraveling. "It shows us the fragile border," she continued, her tone softening, the knot loosening into something like release, between what we see and what we fear to name. "I've chased the concrete, the provable hum of tapes and testimonies, but the forest, it amplifies the questions we carry inside. My fears, your fears, mirrors, not monsters." The emotion shifted, anxiety ebbing into a tentative acceptance, like mist dissolving under tentative sun. She wasn't solving the legend. She was stepping back from it, honoring the porosity she'd once denied. With a click, she stopped the recording, the tape sighing into silence. Rising, she pocketed the device, its weight a companion rather than a chain. The forest loomed, indifferent, its whispers unspoken now. Could she walk away like this? Story unfinished, edges frayed. The question hung in the air, unanswered, as her footsteps faded into the fog.